That's the only time where I've gone back to the scene of the crime with the victim and been given a tour of the House of Horrors where they were held captive. And man, it was wild. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. I'm Myles. I'm here as always with my buddy Sean Cahill. This is usually the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. But today, guys, we're doing a special episode for Halloween. As you can see, we have all of our little decorations up, and we're in a very festive mood here. So, what we're actually going to do today is we're going to dive deep into the background of myself as a television producer in the true crime genre. And we're going to talk about one of the craziest and scariest experiences I've had, craziest and scariest stories that I've ever had to report on. And basically what that experience was and what I went through doing it.
Look, guys, there's a couple ways we could have done the Halloween episode, and some of them just seemed too easy, like Jack the Ripper Unsolved or Zodiac Killer Unsolved, which I'm sure people would be interested in, but it just seems like everyone's done that, right? And so, Miles and I have kind of talked around a little bit what our past is in this world, and both of us do make documentaries, and a lot of true crime television in the past has been on our resumes. So, we were kind of thinking, what about like the cases that terrify us, right? Maybe not even necessarily unsolved, because that almost seems a little disrespectful to make a Halloween episode about an ongoing case, right? Like those are people that still need answers, but maybe something that happened a while ago, maybe something that's been solved and that we know about. And so we tossed some stuff back and forth, and Miles won the lottery. He had the scariest, most disturbing experience. Not that I don't have some of my own. And if you guys like this, we're happy to turn the tables here and we'll do one of mine. But I think for this one, this takes the cake, and I will toss it back to Miles to set up for you exactly what this case is. And then I think the thought there is I'm almost going to interview him a little bit like he's a guest on the show. This is really his story. And so I'm going to let him take me through it, but pop in with questions and ask things that maybe you're wondering, because I'm familiar-ish with this case and this story, but only on the surface level. I think Miles has come closer than anyone would really want to come. So we're going to let him kind of take the lead and take it from there.
Okay, here we go. So, you guys are fans of true crime. Obviously, you watch our channel, you're here, you clicked on the thumbnail. So, most of you are probably aware of a gentleman named Gary Heidnik. If you're not, Gary Heidnik was a guy who lived in Philadelphia, and he kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered several women between 1986 and 1987. He also did some stuff before that that was really, really heinous. But the crimes that Heidnik is really known for happened in this period of time between 1986 and 1987, where he was picking up ladies of the evening, picking up prostitutes on the street, bringing them back to his home under the guise of, I'm going to have a date with you, I'm going to have some fun, and then basically subduing them and confining them in his basement. So at the height of everything, Heidnik had six women confined in his basement. Two of them passed away. One of them, part of the famous part of the story is that he actually disposed of her body by chopping her into pieces and cooking her. And part of the story is that he actually fed that woman cooked in with other food to the other women that were confined in the basement. So this is a really, really gruesome story. Heidnik's basement, he had a pit dug out. That part of the story of the pit in Heidnik's basement was used in the Silence of the Lambs. That was Buffalo Bill's basement. Obviously, in the book and the movie of Silence of the Lambs, there's only one woman confined in there. Heidnik actually had a lot more than that. Heidnik also didn't have a big basement like you see in Silence of the Lambs. It was a very narrow row house in a very urban part of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it was a much smaller place, and there was not a lot of room down there. I know this because I've actually been to the house because that was part of the experience that we're going to talk about today, which was actually going to Philadelphia and spending about 2 weeks with two of the women who survived this experience, interviewing them, going around the city with them, and then getting them together for a never expected reunion that they didn't ask for, all in the name of trying to tell this story and create something that people would want to watch on television.
And I've thought I've had some tough days at work. That's going to be a really interesting tale to hear how you got into that world and met those people and went to that awful, awful place. I should say, probably we should have put a trigger warning or maybe like a trigger treat warning at the
Trick or
top
treat.
at the top of this. Obviously, this is disturbing material, so just beware. It only gets a little crazier from here. Like that's the nutshell version, and the details are even more gruesome. But it's Halloween, and if you're in for a scare, keep watching. So, Myles, you kind of talked to us a little bit about how you got into this. Were you aware of Gary Heidnik's story or this crime before you got tapped to kind of make a documentary about it?
That's a really interesting question. I'm aware of Gary Heidnik because of popular culture. I'll say that. Heidnik's sort of part of that pantheon in pop culture. Even though he wasn't necessarily a serial killer, he is kind of in that zeitgeist.
So yeah, already going into this, it sounds like you knew you were going to be in for quite a ride professionally because this is far above and beyond the typical, crime story, which are all sad and all horrific. But this one's pretty over the top. I mean, he had six women in his basement. Two of them were murdered, and the other four escaped. Am I right there?
One escaped, and then she called the police, and that's how they found the rest of them, and that's how Heidnik ended up getting arrested. But
Wow.
her escape is quite a tale because it wasn't what you think of when you think of escape. It involved a lot of manipulation and hustle on her part.
Right. And she, the one who escaped and ultimately like cracked this whole thing open was the first one he kidnapped, right? Or no.
Correct. Yeah, that was Josephina Rivera, who was one of the women that I actually interviewed and spent that period of time with when I was in Philly.
Well, how about this? Because I think, for some people watching this, they might not know what exactly this kind of a show is or entails, but like you
Hmm.
weren't there to make like a fictional scripted piece on this, right? It was a documentary with sort of light recreation, or why don't you tell me like what was the job here?
So the project ended up being called Monster Preacher. Those of you guys who know the story of Heidnik, you'll know that he had actually started a church running out of his living room. Really, what it was about was Heidnik was luring people to his home and then taking advantage of mostly developmentally disabled African American women. That's not to say that the women who ended up in his basement were all developmentally disabled. One of them was, but that was sort of his scheme. Girls from the neighborhood would come over, and then he would prey on them, and that was part of his little church scheme that he had going on. So the preacher thing to me was a little bit of a misnomer, but I do understand why the network went with that because it's a cool, grabby title. But he wasn't necessarily really a true believer or anything like that, and I never felt like his preaching and his supposed faith was really anything that was driving what he was doing. It was really just a cover to be able to get vulnerable women into his house.
Yeah, yeah, that's seems like more what it is. And it does seem like, he's a predator, as you said. I mean, this is someone who's trying to figure out and scheme a way to get people's trust and let people maybe leave vulnerable young women around him. And unfortunately, that was what he landed on, and it worked.
Yeah, I mean, Heidnik was an undeniable psychopath. I mean, there's no question about it. So, yeah, the idea was that there was access to these survivors, and the idea was that they had never been interviewed together. They hadn't seen each other since getting out of Heidnik's basement, and this was Josephine Rivera and Jacqueline Askins, who I know as Jackie. So Jackie was the last person who was brought into Heidnik's basement. She was also the youngest, and Josephina was the first, and I believe she was the oldest out of the group as well. So it's interesting because Josephina was actually really, really streetwise and very savvy, and Jackie was very young and the opposite in a lot of ways. And blamed Josephina for a lot of what had happened because basically, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of us, but basically the way that Josephina got out of Heidnik's basement was that she gained his trust, and she gained his trust to a point where he didn't confine her in the basement anymore, and then she was actually like staying with him upstairs in the house and helping him sort of discipline the other women. And she was involved in some stuff with some of the other women, one of them in particular, where, one of them ended up dying. And, Jackie kind of blamed Josephina for that. And really, if you look at it, it's like, what was she going to do? But she was basically helping Heidnik discipline the women, and there was electricity involved, and water filled up the pit, and they were electrocuting the girls. And Josephina did take part in that with Heidnik. So Jackie always blamed her for that. I don't know if Jackie ever really understood that it was if it wasn't for Josephina, they might have never gotten out of the basement, because basically what happened was, because she gained Heidnik's trust so much through doing these things, he actually took her out of the house. She snuck away and she got on a payphone and she called the cops. And kudos to her, because she could have just run away at that point and gotten the hell out of there. And then the police came. And I hate to say this, because so many of our unsolved cases have like questionable police work in them, and we're constantly saying that we're friends of the police, and I do consider myself a friend of law enforcement. But anyone who looks at the story of what happened with Gary Heidnik, it's undeniable that there was so many screw ups on this case, to the point where neighbors had called the cops because there were odors emitting from the house, and because Heidnik was literally cooking one of his victims in his oven. And the cops came, and Heidnik came out and said, "Oh, I was making a roast and I burnt it." And they turned around to the people in the neighborhood and they said, "Hey, this is what Mr. Heidnik says. Let's move along." And they
Unbelievable.
never went in the house. They didn't check on it. So he actually got called on. They did call the cops. And there's also a lot of stuff that plays into this, which is like, if you look at Philly in the 80s, and race relations, and who were the cops and who were the people in this neighborhood. Gary lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. It was a economically lower class neighborhood. He was a white guy. He owned his home. He had this church business going on. So he had a certain stature around there, and that definitely played into it. And the reason that I bring that up is because when Josephina calls the cops and they come to the payphone where she's at, the first thing they say is, "Are you in a fight with your John? Or are you in a fight with your pimp?" Because Josephina looked like, a prostitute, the way she was dressed and everything. And she had been. That's what she was when Gary picked her up. And so they immediately jumped to that conclusion that she was trying to get either her pimp or her John in trouble. And that's why she called the cops. And she's like, "No, I've been held captive in a basement by a madman. And there's other women that are still there. And there's two of us that are dead. And we need your help." And eventually the right people heard it, and they did, take her, and they raided the basement, and they rescued the other women.
So many questions, because I mean, this is just insane. And I think for the people hearing it for the first time, especially, like, a couple of things come to mind. The first one was, okay, so he lives in a crowded neighborhood in Philly in a row house. Most of us can probably picture that. These women are in the basement. There's six of them. Did no one hear them scream? I mean, did he have a plan for that? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I interviewed one of the neighbors, and she said that they would hear sounds and stuff, and that Heidnik was constantly covering it, and making excuses, because they saw him bringing these women in and out, right? I mean, you guys who don't live in like densely populated, urban areas, you've still seen movies and stuff. I mean, it's like there's always someone on the street. There's a lady who, sits in the window like this and watches everything. And like, people were constantly seeing Gary coming in with these obvious, like, working women. And they didn't always see the women come out. So there was a lot of rumors. There was a lot of chatter in the neighborhood, certainly, about him. And yes, the neighbors did hear stuff. And like I said, I interviewed one of them, and she was actually white. Like, they were like this really working class white family. And they had their suspicions about Heidnik. So
Wow. So the other thing that comes to mind that I think about a lot when you hear these serial killer stories from back in the 70s and 80s, which is just you have to picture a time before people had seen Silence of the Lambs, before the internet with like, all these murderpedia sites where like everyone knows all this stuff. Back then, people were aware that people got murdered, but it just felt like a more maybe not even innocent time, but just naive in a way that, you smell something weird at your neighbor's house, you see women coming in and not coming out. You could probably buy an excuse for that. Whereas today, I feel like people are like, that guy's a serial killer, and the police too. I mean, even the fact that like they would come there and everybody would be concerned and there would be this bizarre smell and they would just take the guy at his word. Where I feel like that might happen today, but everyone's just is so much more savvy to the darkest parts of the human psyche and all of these cases that have come since Gary Heidnik, like Jeffrey Dahmer and all these guys. I just think as a culture, maybe we're more aware of it. And it is hard to look back at these cases and be like, how could nobody know? Like this guy's almost in plain sight doing the most insane thing imaginable. But to me, that's the only thing that sort of makes sense is we're looking at it with like the, 2025 hindsight, knowing everything we know about how these guys operate and how this stuff works and all these cases in the zeitgeist and the films and like you said, the music even, has like chronicled this stuff. So yeah, but it's mind blowing hearing
I
because
feel like when this happened, because it's like 86 into 87, right? And he got busted in 80 in early 87. Um, like that was, like the beginning of serial killer, sort of, fascination, where you had Axl Rose wearing a Charlie Manson shirt on stage. You had bands like Slayer starting to talk about guys like Ed Gein, but it was not like it is now where you have like multi-million dollar television productions made by a guy like Ryan Murphy where there's like, hey, on this season we're going to do this serial killer psychopath and next
right.
season, stay tuned for this one. Like, now we have a whole season of Dahmer and now we have a whole season of Ed Gein.
Yeah,
Everyone's aware of this stuff now, and I don't think Heidnik would have been able to get away with it. The fact that it happened, the fact that it happened in almost like broad daylight, like you said, like if you look at Ed Gein, he was in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, he was like on a farm or something. And usually that's what you think of. I mean, Manson, they were on a ranch, I mean, I know when they did their murders, they came into Hollywood, but they were living on a ranch, plotting out all this stuff, taking acid, doing whatever he was doing with these kids. It's not like you're in the middle of Philly where there's a Chinese restaurant down the block, literally in like a corner store. And when you're running a church and you got like a little plaque outside your house, and meanwhile you got six women, chained up in your basement in a pit. I mean, it's nuts.
it is. I mean, what you're saying is so true. I think there's like this almost folkloric like thing that we always imagine like the monster lives out in the woods, right? And so these people are out there, and if you go out in the woods after dark, Ed Gein will get you, or the Manson cult will find you, or like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like you stumbled onto the wrong farm kind of hills have eyes thing, right? So someone living in the middle of a big city like that in full view of everyone, it's crazy to think about. And I guess maybe the other thing that could play into it is, I mean, we all know what Philadelphia is like, more or less, even if you've never been there. That's a rough and tumble city, especially in the 1980s. And that's a rough and tumble neighborhood in a rough and tumble city in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
rough
yeah.
and
No,
tumble
this
decade, right?
wasn't. This was Philly. This was like,
So yeah,
yeah,
so women who are known to be maybe, working girls going in and out of a house in a neighborhood like that, maybe didn't raise the eyebrows you'd think it would. Strange smells, noises, people just being eccentric. It's the middle of a big city, and that stuff actually is fairly common even today. So I think Heidnik seems like a guy who was smart enough in his own sick way to realize that he could just sort of blend in that place doing what he did. And it's like you said, it's a miracle that he got caught at all, because Josephina, it took a really long time for her to get out, gain that trust, make that call. And even after that, like you said, I mean, the first time the police came, it was kind of not a big deal. So it's crazy that these women did escape, and it's tragic, of course, that two of them were killed while they were there.
There's this whole element of race in this story that's like you can't avoid it,
Mm,
right? Because all of his victims were African American. Like he was white, he was living in this predominantly black neighborhood. He was preying on like the weak and defenseless to a large degree. But Heidnik's philosophy was actually like sort of like anti-racist in a weird way. Like he actually thought that the only way that there was going to be like peace on earth was if there was a blending of the races, and he believed that like ultimately that's what was going to happen, that we were all going to kind of like intermingle and come together, and he was trying to hasten that and sort of breed his own race by impregnating these women that he was raping in his basement,
mm.
but he never actually succeeded in getting any of them pregnant because probably, they were on like a starvation diet and they were under like insane stress. And he was like, raping them on a dirty mattress in a pit in his basement. So like not the perfect circumstances. For anyone out there who's ever had trouble, having a baby, we all know it's not as easy as everyone thinks all the time. And he wasn't having much luck getting these women pregnant. And he had had children before that, who had all been taken into the system.
Well, I had read too, like you mentioned the starvation diet, that he gave these women like crackers or like, two or three hot dogs to split amongst themselves. Like that's what they were eating for months down there. So
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, I mean, anyone who's gone through the journey of trying to have a child knows that ain't a good diet, right? For a mother to be working with. So very strange that he went through all of this planning and all of this stuff, and then my mind is always blown actually by criminals, like where they plan and how much effort they put into like certain parts of their scheme, and then where the really obvious stuff like completely falls apart. Like, oh yeah, you should probably feed these women if you're planning on getting them all pregnant. But yeah, didn't think that far ahead, I guess, or maybe it just wasn't that important. I don't know.
The women both told me that he was extremely cheap.
Mm,
Like he would decorate his house in like leftover, like Coke bottles and stuff. And he had a very strange, decor sense of decor, and was very, very stingy with his money, apparently.
recycling center chic, I think they call
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So he wasn't cooking them big meals or anything like that.
Ay, ay, ay. So, talk to me a little bit about your personal experience actually meeting the survivors, because I think that's one of the things in your story that really blows my mind. I've covered a lot of cases where the people are gone, and I've never, had the pleasure of meeting them, but you actually did in this one. These people survived that basement, met this monster, and lived to talk about it. So tell me, like, what was that like for you? I mean,
It was hard, I mean, I don't want to act like I'm like a war veteran or something. It's like I'm just some guy who produced a TV show, but it was emotionally it was difficult, because as you know, and you guys see it, with the content that we're doing here on True Crime Unsolved. I mean, Sean and I really connect with these folks, and that's the only way you're really going to get good content is if you actually put yourself out there and put yourself on the line and are willing to really understand what someone's been through and put part of yourself into that and try to relate to it, and connect with them. And if you don't do that, I think you're some sort of sociopath. Like I don't know how you could do that kind of work without being affected by it. Like if you're going out and you're meeting with families of people who have been, murdered, and they're sharing and they're opening their life to you and sharing the absolute worst thing that they've been through, and you're not affected by that, then there's probably something wrong with you. And most people that I know who do that kind of work are, and some people have to get therapy because of it. It's called like uh what is it, like witness trauma or something, like when you just keep hearing these stories over and over again, and it, I mean, Sean, you know what I'm talking about. But this one was like worse. Jackie had her family around her, and Jackie did have like a support system that she could rely on, but emotionally and mentally, she had a lot of problems. And I got to be honest with you, like when I was conducting her interview, we had to take a break to like change the cards in the camera or something, or change batteries. And I was like, everyone take five, and I had to walk away. I left, and I went and got some air. That doesn't happen to me too often, but it was, I was getting choked up and affected by what she had told me because her life story was so tragic. And the time from when she was like 13 years old, I think she told me, when she got turned out by a pimp and hooked on drugs, to the age of 18 when Heidnik picked her up under the guise of prostitution and brought her into his basement and handcuffed her to a pipe in his basement by her ankle. There was nothing good, man. I mean, it was just like this woman's life was just so brutal. And then to have gone through what she went through, and to still be walking around and, talking to us and being pretty sweet, and talking about her kids and stuff like that. But she told me that like she had episodes where, and I don't think we included this at all in the show, but she told me where, she would have episodes where she would like black out and like attack her family members, and like think that she was still back there and just lose it. And because the trauma that she had been through before she met Heidnik had probably, frozen her in a certain, emotional and mental state as like a fucking adolescent, let's be honest. But then to go through that and to literally like, eat her friend, which she told me, if you look it up on Wikipedia or whatever, it'll say like it's said that, that Heidnik cooked one of the victims and fed them to the other ones. But like from what I've heard from the person who was actually there, they did eat their friend. And Jackie kind of intimated that she knew, and that she was so hungry that she didn't care because it was the first, decent meal that they had had. Because they never really got food, as you said, that, he was feeding them like crackers and like hot dogs. So, that was pretty terrifying, dude. Like when she told me that, I believe I'm gonna try to quote what Jackie said. She was like, and I ate her and it was good. And she's like, I couldn't help it. I was down to my ribs. Like, basically, I think we even used it in one of the promos for the show because it was such an insane line.
Yeah.
It was really, 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 really sad to go through that with her and understand the depths of suffering that she had been through. Both in her, like I said, her life before this happened, to when she got out. And then, nothing was done for them. That was the other big part of the story. And I'll go into the, Josephina and sort of, her character and everything. But when they got out, they weren't really given any help. And Josefina Rivera, she's a really, really interesting character. And she actually wrote a book about the experience. Like I said, it was because of her that the other girls got out. It was her streetwise manipulation of Heidnik that saved them. And she had to do some stuff that I don't think she was very happy with. And I think, if I'm gonna be honest, I think she had some, what's the phrase I'm looking for when you kind of separate yourself from what's actually happened and,
Like
rewrite history.
dissociate.
Yeah, and she like kind of rewrote history a little bit about what she had actually done in order to gain Heidnick's trust. But like Jackie certainly didn't forget it. Her story is almost like someone who was in like a camp, like a POW camp or something, and like, she went along with her captors in order to gain their trust so that she could then, stage a prison break, and she did it. And if
Yeah.
she had walked away and not helped the other girls, it would be a completely different story. But looking at what she did in the context of, she did, as soon as she had an opportunity, call the police and save everybody. That's what always stuck with me about her.
Right. Well, I mean, everything you said about Josephina and how she kind of got everybody out of there by manipulating, Gary, but having to go along with some of this stuff, it's just such an interesting study. And I feel like a lot of that stuff has been studied, like the Stanford prison experiment, do this to this person, right? And you're an authority figure. And if you're also a kidnapped individual dealing with like an insane, murderer, you're probably going to do it, or at least pretend that you're good to go along with it until you get your moment. And I think that takes an incredible, I don't even know what you would call this character trait, but I don't think everybody's game for that. It speaks a lot to her character that she was able to sort of mentally go through with things that most of us would find like totally abhorrent in order to sort of, the ends justify the means, find a way out for everybody and keep her sanity the whole time. Because, sometimes these people wind up with like Stockholm syndrome and they stay for longer than they needed to, like you hear about that once in a while. There's a famous case where that happened. I can't think of the person's name, but um, yeah, you're like, oh, you could have escaped 2 years ago, but you hung out, and then something else wound up getting you out of the situation, and then those people have to be almost like deprogrammed and brought
Right.
back.
Right, right.
It's
No, no,
crazy.
Josephina knew what she was doing. Like
Yeah.
she got her way out of that basement into Heidnik's bedroom, and like she was plotting. She knew that the next step was to get out,
Hmm.
to get out of the house. But I mean, let me tell you, like the spookiest stuff, not shooting the recreations. It was, let's be honest, it was kind of fun because it was like at that point, time had passed. We'd already done the interviews. We were kind of making a horror movie, right? We had this big
Hmm.
set, and Heidnik would walk. It was like shooting one of these like serial killer things, right? So
Hmm.
that was kind of like, that was fun in a way, but spending time with the real people is where the real horror came from for me, and that's where the sleepless nights and the nightmares and stuff. I mean, it was a tough job, man. I mean, I carried it for a while, where because we went back to shoot the recreations. There was like a time period where like we edited together the interviews, and we sort of built the show out, and then we went back to Philly to shoot everything. So time had passed at that point. But man, when I was there shooting those interviews for that like half a month, and after that when I was home, I was pretty messed up. It was not easy. It would be interesting. We should interview my wife about this because she was living with me at the time, and I mean, obviously she's living with me now, but I'm saying we moved in together. And it's like we lived together for like a year, I think, and then COVID hit, and then I went and shot this Gary Heidnik doc. It was just like she's
What a
like,
couple
"Who
of
are
years.
you? What is
Yeah.
this life I've
Oh
signed
my
up for
God.
here?" Right? Um, Basically, what we did, and I'm not gonna blame this on anybody. Like look, I did it, but I do think that it was something that the network had asked if I thought that I could pull off. We brought them back to the house separately, because they hadn't seen each other. And so I remember I brought Josephina there at night, and it was raining, and we were on this street in this pretty tough neighborhood in Philly, and it was pouring rain, so there wasn't really anybody out. But man, was it spooky! And Josephina was just game. Like she didn't, I had an umbrella over her, and she brought us up to the house, and she was like, "Yep, this is it." And they had like resurfaced it, repainted it, tried to make it look different, but the house was still there. And yeah, she just kind of walked us through it, and like like trying to show us from the outside, like where everything happened and what her memories
Wow.
were. And while she's like chain smoking in the pouring rain, and me and my crew are just like filming it, man. And it was wild, because you don't usually do that. Like you said, you meet people who have been through stuff. Maybe you get to interview a cop, or you interview someone whose family member went through the horrible thing. But
Hmm.
that's the only time for me where I've gone back to the scene of the crime with the victim and been given a tour of the House of Horrors where they were held captive. And man, it was wild. And then we brought Jackie there in the daytime, and there was a guy I remember, a young man, like probably in his 20s, who I guess lived on the street, and he started talking to her, and we were filming it, and she was like, "Yeah, he's like, oh, this is that house, right?" And neighborhood guy, and she started telling him everything. She was like, "Yeah, I was held in this basement, and I ate my friend, and everything." But the kid was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "No, she's telling you the truth. Like she's a survivor of Gary Heidnik's basement. Do you want to sign this release so I can
Right.
use this
Right.
footage? You
One
know,
more thing, young man. I need you to
it's,
sign off on
yeah.
this.
So I'm watching this guy. You have to laugh, but I mean, Jackie would just talk about it. A lot of times you interview people, especially family members, surviving family members. I really believe this because I've experienced it, and like how many emails you've gotten in your life, and how many emails you've gotten in your career, and how many calls, and people still stay in touch with you, and they just thank you for doing what you're doing. And like it's cathartic sometimes. Like sometimes people just haven't talked about it. Not
Mhm.
everybody has people to talk about. Not everybody's capable of it. I know that that's a good thing, and I never feel exploitative in doing what we do because the way that we do it is the right way. But dragging Jackie to the house where she was held captive,
Man.
chained to a pipe, and listening to her talk about having to eat her friend and like almost dying and watching her other friend, drown in the pit, from electrocution, being electrocuted and then drowning in the water.
Yeah.
It's a lot, man. That's a lot. It's like, oh, you went through that, and I'm with you right now, and I'm filming it. And what the hell am
Yeah.
I doing? And I can't sleep. It was hard, man. It was really, really hard. There was one day where Josephina didn't show up, and it was like basically the way that the whole thing was set up, and everybody had agreed to, and what we wanted to do was we wanted to get them together at the end because they hadn't seen each other since they had gotten out of that basement, and
Mhm.
obviously Jackie had held on to this idea that Josephina was like had colluded with Heidnik basically because again you're talking about someone who's kind of living in this like she was on the street at 13. She got abducted by a madman
Right.
at 18. Like, where's her mental, where's her emotional age at? I'm not a professional, but I can tell you that it's not the age that she is. You know what I
Yeah, yeah, I
mean?
would think that would scramble things a little bit,
She's
right? I mean, that's pretty
pretty
unusual.
scrambled and
Yeah.
stunted. So she was like, she's a villain. She's Heidnick's girlfriend, and I hate her. And it's like, well, she actually saved your life. She got you out. So it was like the idea was like we're gonna get them together and try to reconcile this. Um,
Right.
in a really weird way on television in a park, in a
Oh
park
man.
in Philly, right? So like, yeah, that was the driving thing at the end. And the first time that we were supposed to do it, funny enough, the stronger minded person didn't show up. Jackie was ready to go. She was at the hotel with us. She was like, let's do it, like whatever.
Wow.
But Josephina didn't show up. And
Huh.
I mean, you know how I am when it comes to work. I called everybody and they were like, "What are you going to do?" I was like, "I'm going to go out there myself," and I had her address and I drove to is Atlantic City, where her apartment was, and it was this like what probably used to be like a hotel, and it had been converted into like low income housing kind of thing. Like,
Mhm.
and I remember I got in and there was like a front desk with security and stuff, and I just slipped by somehow because when I want to do that kind of stuff, I can. I tap into that Brooklyn, and I just kind of like da, 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 da. And I just slipped on the elevator and I went up to her apartment and I realized, oh, you're still in it. Like you're not as strong as I thought you were. Um, you're still affected by everything that you've been through.
Yeah.
And you're really, really good at putting up a front and communicating and you're super intelligent, but you're still in it. And that's when it really hit me. That was like a wake up moment for me. And then I
Right.
talked to her guy and he was like, we'll be there tomorrow. Like, can you do it? We rearranged everything and I had a nice conversation with them and I was super respectful. And then I snuck back out and then, we did it. We ended up doing it.
Wow.
But that was really rough.
Yeah, that's super rough. I mean, kudos for her for coming the next day. That's so how did that go? I mean, when these two finally met and they got to hash it out, like that's got to be a reunion from hell in a way, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So I insisted that we had a mental health professional on set. And I want I should say on location because it wasn't a set. It was a park. But I want all of you guys to know that because I do think that that's important. And TV gets a bad rap, and sometimes rightfully so.
Right. You weren't trying to do like an episode of Maury or Jerry Springer, right? Where you're
Exactly.
just like,
No,
yeah.
and I wasn't trying to like like what they did to Chino. You know what I mean? Where like he didn't even know, and they just like knocked on his door and they're like, "Hey, did you kill this woman and abduct and kill this woman?" It was like this was set up. They knew it was going to happen.
Everyone agreed it was in a
Yeah,
neutral location. Yeah.
yeah. But I just felt that knowing, especially for Jackie, knowing what she had been through and how she looked at Josephina, I felt that like having someone there who could handle some sort of like breakdown or like episode or whatever might happen was really really important. Just
Yeah.
just in case, for her sake. So we did have a therapist who was like sitting on a bench like like in the park. It's like it's so crazy when I think about this.
Well, it's
It's
sometimes,
it's like a
yeah.
sting, like it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I got my shrink over there and I got the third camera in the tree.
There's these moments when you're producing television that are so bizarre like that, where you just kind of look around and you're like, what am I doing right now? You've got these two people who had this horrible experience in the 80s. They don't like each other. You've flown in some shrink to just sit on a bench nearby, and you're kind of like the ringmaster of this situation. It's very, very strange. I've had that feeling myself a couple times.
Yeah.
You're just
And
like,
they
wow, what
both
is going on
trusted
right now?
me,
Yeah.
above everything, and
Yeah.
that's the job, and I'd become close with both of them. And I guess that's sort of what we're talking about here, right? More than Heidnik, this is really about Josephine and Jackie and what they had been through and the horror of that and my secondhand experience with it
Yeah. And
because
you're
it's like,
going through it, like the
yeah,
reliving of it, right? Yeah.
yeah. And
Well, that's
yeah,
why this is the,
I had to establish a relationship with both of them, to make this work. And it was different, like I said, like Josephina, I had fun with her. She's kind of flirty and fun and really intelligent and stuff and complimentary and like she really knew how to work me in a way. And Jackie was like this like fragile tragic person who literally when I got up and walked away from that interview she said I got you huh like she was like that I've seen strong men she said she was like you're a strong guy but my story's really really bad isn't it basically like so you're
wow.
not the first one to get up crying after talking to me about what I've been through so the two very very different people that I had to establish like fairly intimate relationships with very quickly right and then put them together. So yeah, like Jackie was already in the park. I had her set up there, with my other people, and she was comfortable. And I came with Josephina because obviously she was going through it since she hadn't shown up when she was supposed to, and then I finally got her back, and I rode with her and everything, and I was like, here we are, and I was
Yeah.
her buddy, and kind of like walked with her until I released her, and we got the shot of them, getting together, and then yeah, they chatted, and it was okay, I really thought Jackie was going to go off, but she didn't. She didn't. She was actually, I think at a certain point, like she was kind of happy. She was kind of happy to see her. And then they talked about the other girls that had made it. And what they thought had happened to them. I think there was one in particular that they thought they knew where she was. And there was one of them that we had spoken to who just didn't want to be involved. Like they were the only two who would do the program. But
Right.
yeah, they ended up having like a kind of chit-chatty convo. But I do remember at the end. Jackie wanted to like hang out or like grab a bite to eat, and Josephina was like peace out, like she was kind of like, maybe
Yeah.
I'll call you kind of thing, like I'm out of here. Like I don't know if that's like she didn't want to be reminded of everything or whatever, but
I
yeah,
mean, one can only imagine, like, in those two women's minds, like the emotions and the trauma, and, like, who knows how that felt for them. I mean, none of us have been, thank God, in their position before. That's so unique and so horrible. And then, of course, the trauma, what's interesting about it is tied up with each other because of what Josephina did. So it's like, people maybe who have been through war together are both traumatized, but maybe they can get together and talk about it from the same side of it, where this is a little more complex, right? Josephina was not in Jacqueline's good graces when they met. But then by the end of it, it's what's kind of crazy is Jackie's the one that wanted to get lunch.
Yeah,
Odd.
and that was
Yeah.
the thing. Like Jackie just wanted connection.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, I mean, now we're really getting into like armchair psychology, but excuse me, I think in some ways Josephina was more screwed up by the whole thing than Jackie was in some ways because, seeing her and knowing what she had thought about her and what Josephina did have to do in order to get them out of that basement, in order to gain Heidnik's trust. Maybe it messed her up more than she realized. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what can be so tough about doing that sort of a thing for a living is like you do have to go deal with people's real lives that are often really messed up and not pretty and ugly and tough. And you also have to get close to them in some ways and then find a way to set a boundary, which can be really hard, and especially for people who, like these two sound like they don't really understand the boundary or they just don't care, but you've got to be the one, right?
Yeah.
To sort of put it up, so that's difficult, man. Yeah.
I mean, it's wild to research something and see photographs of these women, when they were rescued, and they were young. And you're studying this story and you're learning everything about it, and and they're like characters in your brain. And then you meet them in person and you're literally asking them about what it was like to be held captive in a basement by a serial rapist, murderer, guy who cooked up their friend and made them eat it. Um, just it's like the most heinous experience. And you're just, you're like you read about, it's like I'm trying to think of an analogy, where like you read about something and then like you meet the person and you get to talk to them about it. And it's like that's
Yeah.
what this was, where it was like there's like characters out of a book, and I'm sitting with them, you know, getting all this information out of them and putting them through this, probably like really triggering traumatic experience, and I'm in it myself,
Right, right,
and like,
right.
yeah, I got my buddy Martin with me as my camera guy, my DP, but he's not in it. Like he's looking at me like, that's a good line, like
Yeah.
he's like, you got the promo there,
Right. Well, because he doesn't have to have the relationship with these people. Like
right.
he shows up in his relationships with the camera.
Yeah, and good
Yeah,
for him. And
that's
Marty,
awesome.
we love you. But I guess what I'm saying is that I'm alone there with these two women, basically. It's like me and them at the end of the day, as far
Yeah.
as like this experience goes.
Yeah. Well, Martin probably didn't get the Christmas money texts. I
No,
would, I would imagine.
it's,
So it really is you.
that didn't
Uh,
happen. Yeah.
yeah. Oh man. Well, it's interesting that you say that too, because I think, it's something I've experienced as well, where, these stories that are sometimes famous like this one, where everyone's seen this news article or this stuff on TV and you know about it. And it's like, you're affected by it, seeing it that way. But then maybe you'll go in person and meet those people and cover it and hug them and talk to them for hours and maybe even, tear up with them or whatever. It's a whole other level of hit you in the gut, right? I mean, I think unless you've done it, it's hard to understand. I think therapists probably understand this one pretty well. People who professionally talk to folks about their worst experiences and sit
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
the sponge for that. But
I
this
mean,
one in
people who
particular,
work in like prisons,
yeah,
and have to talk to folks who have done really awful stuff and been through awful stuff.
honestly,
Absolutely.
cops, like a lot of cops talk to people and have their, folks pour their hearts out to them and see the ugliness and have to deal. There's a lot of that, man. And this one's just insane because it's so egregious and over the top. And I think, again, you met the survivors and worked with them, which on a lot of these true crime stories that were sent to cover, there are no survivors. You'll talk to the family who's traumatized and the investigators, and that's really hard enough. But to be with the people who actually like miraculously made it through what very came this close to being their murder, and in some ways could even be worse because of the torture that they endured. I mean, man, yeah. Well, I can see why this counts as the case that haunts you. I really get it.
Yeah, I still think about it. I still think about it. Sadie, my wife still brings it up sometimes. She'll, if she's trying to explain to somebody, why my career's been a little crazy. She definitely goes to this one as an example. And there's other stuff that I can think of. I mean, I've had a great time. I mean, and I love what we're doing now.
Mhm.
But and I've been able to do a lot of really interesting stuff, travel to a lot of places, made a lot of great friends. But yeah, this one has kept me up at night and given me nightmares and stuck with me. And I still think about Jackie and I still think about Josephina. And it's interesting talking to you about it right now because I'm really, really thinking about them in a way that I haven't in quite a while.
Yeah.
And it's really stirring up a lot of stuff. And I'm wondering like how they're doing and all of that. Because like I said, I don't think either of them ever fully moved on. And I learned that by spending that time with them, that I don't know if you can move on completely from going through something like that.
It's so beyond the pale of human imagining that yeah, I don't know that you can. And but it is kind of the sad coda to this whole thing is that your experience in the story, there is still not a happy ending. It's like not even like, oh, they escaped and all this time later, she runs a shop for tourists in Cape Cod and whatever. It's like, no, they're right there where they were. It's as grim as ever. And that's tough, man, because I'm sure it bothers you getting close to them and knowing that that's kind of where this all washed out in the end. It's very bleak.
That's funny because that's the movie version, right? Where
Yeah.
where Josephine is actually like a powerful small business owner or something. And
Right. She goes on to have like a law firm that fights for like battered women or something. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's totally it. I mean, look, at the end of the day, like Jackie had her family around her. Like I said, she had people staying with her when we were
that's
there.
positive.
There were
Yeah.
kids that were really, really sweet that were there with her. She definitely like ended up in a place with people around her. She just had this ongoing trauma that she had to deal with. Yeah, and like she said, she would have these episodes, and she had like attacked her nephew one time. She told me, and it was an ongoing struggle. But she definitely had like love in her life for
Mhm.
sure. And like I said, Josephina, she had her guy, and I'm not completely sure what else was going on there, but it was just there was definitely like still some darkness to it.
So, guys, thank you so much for joining us for our first ever Halloween special. That was definitely different. Next week, all of this will be gone. No more lights, no more witch, no more trick or treat behind Myles. It'll be back to business as usual. And we're going to do an interview with Lisa Daniels, who is Tiffany Witten's mother. That's a case we've already done a breakdown for and spoken to the DA. So that's coming next week. And then for the rest of the month, we have two back-to-back brand new cases, and that includes case breakdowns and interviews. So stay tuned. We are back to the mission after this little Halloween detour, and I'll see you guys there.
Thanks, everybody.